Welcome everyone to the Roy Morgan Future of Retail webinar. Today we're examining how retail is emerging from COVID and what the future looks like for retailers and shoppers alike. Last Christmas was an historic high point for retail sales after a horrible year of COVID lockdowns. But now what everyone wants to know is, can this Christmas come close to matching the heights of 2020? And what are the prospects for next year? But before we look for answers, let me introduce my co-presenter, social scientist Dr. Ross Honeywill. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you, Michelle. There are 50 days left to Christmas, and I've been counting down every single one of them.
Well, Ross, I hope you're doing more than that. You need to get out and start shopping.
I promise, I promise, I promise. You know that I'm a former retail executive many years ago, and one of the changes that I've watched over the years is how much shorter calendar events are becoming for retailers. Christmas used to start in early November, but now shopping is getting closer and closer to Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I see that too. So Roy Morgan has partnered with the Australian Retailers Association. We provide research data and sales forecasting to the ARA and look forward to a long and fruitful relationship with the ARA and its members, the retailers. So Ross, let's see what's under the Christmas tree for retailers this year. First up, the good news is that our brilliant data modelling team has forecast retail sales in the run-up to Christmas to match last year's record high. This is terrific news for the retail economy. You can see from this slide that the Roy Morgan predictor engine, the green dotted line, has a very close correlation with actual sales, that's the solid black line, back to January 2019. But what matters is going forward, and looking forward, we expect Christmas sales to be more than 11% ahead of 2019. Ross, I said our brilliant data scientist, and let me explain why I say that. Normally Christmas sales are fairly predictable. There's the facts, how have sales been travelling month on month during the year? And then there's how are people feeling, consumer confidence, and what are they intending to buy? And we at Roy Morgan measure these things. We measure consumer confidence, we measure future intention for a vast array of categories, everything from mobile phones and computer games to cars and houses and pretty much everything in between. Then came COVID, what Andrew Groves would have called a strategic inflection point. But whatever you call it, the tectonic plates of our consumer demand, retailer supply, and what you might call distribution glue, all shifted. And of course, on top of that, you had government policy, lockdowns, and economic stimulus. These are what the modelling folk call exogenous factors. And all the traditional predictive models stopped working. Our data scientists over the last 2 to 3 months have systematically explored and teased out these impacts and remodelled the historic COVID impacted data. And we expect Christmas sales to be more than 11% ahead of 2019.
Yeah, that's fantastic news. But we all know that New South Wales has had a really tough year. So Sydney retailers in particular should be delighted that Christmas sales are forecast to match last year and be 10% up on pre-COVID 2019. Now, Michelle, you and I both live in Melbourne, and a couple of weeks ago I did the sums on how long we've actually been locked down.
Long time.
And of the 18 months since COVID first struck, we've been in lockdown for 9 of them. That's 50% of the past 18 months. So I hope you've got some really good news for us.
I have got good news, Ross. Victorian retail sales look like beating last Christmas.
Excellent.
And if that happens, it will be an outstanding boost for Melbourne's long-suffering retailers. It also looks like Christmas this year will beat 2019 by more than 11%. Let's take a quick look at the other states. So while actual dollars are relatively small, Tasmania is the standout performer on growth percentages. 4% up on last year and 15% ahead of 2019. Victoria, Western Australia and the ACT are also predicted to beat last year.
Fantastic.
And if we look at the major retail categories, hospitality is set to stage a big comeback, 12% up on last Christmas. I guess that's fueled by all that pent-up demand in Melbourne and Sydney.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't look like household goods, a category that includes furniture, consumer electronics and electrical appliances, will sustain last year's record high. That said, it does look like beating Christmas 2019 by 14%.
You know, a big pre-Christmas event on the retail calendar is, of course, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday 4-day sale.
Yeah, it is, Ross, and online shopping accelerates every year. And this year, we should see more records broken.
You know, according to Australia Post, last year's event was the biggest ever, beating the record set in 2019 by an incredible 42%.
Yeah, I saw that. And this year, Roy Morgan is forecasting another lift. We estimate that $5.4 billion will be spent over the 4 days of Black Friday, Cyber Monday. That's just ahead of last year's record.
So what you're saying, Michele, is that it's another record sales event ahead of another record Christmas. This is really, really good news for Australian retailers. The big question, though, is can it sustain past Christmas? Or will what we might call the rebound party end when we return to some kind of normality?
It's a good question, but even before we look at next year, there are still 50 days to Christmas. And for me, the wild card is distribution. If indeed Santa's sleigh is stuck in a traffic jam or the elves go on strike and it becomes obvious the online distribution system might not deliver before Christmas, or even if people think it might not, it will be all bets off. But sustainability beyond Christmas is an important question, and it looks like the answer is positive. Positive, that is, if everything goes to plan. And given the track record of this year and last year, that's a big ask.
It is.
Our predictive engine, all things going as planned, has January 15% up on 2020. It has February 14% up and March 4% ahead of March 2020. And comparing the first quarter next year to the same period this year, the news remains positive. So this is a really good start to the year for retailers, all being well. But so much relies not only on the confidence of people, but on the confidence of businesses to invest in their future by lifting wages, opening more stores and employing more Australians. And business confidence had a really strong lift in October. It's still got a way to go, but it's a very good sign.
You just raised a really, really important point, Michele, and that is what could go wrong and potentially torpedo the very strong retail recovery, particularly as we move into 2020. So let's take a look at the few threats. The top 5 are rising inflation, the risk of future lockdowns, the experienced economy restarting after so many restrictions on like travel and hospitality in particular, the slowing of online shopping due to delivery issues and fears about purchases taking weeks to arrive, and Australian retailers' price obsession. Let's start with inflation. Inflation in the US currently is about 4%. That's its highest level since before the global financial crisis, the GFC, what Americans call the Great Recession.
And inflation has both a practical and a psychological impact on retail spending. And of course, as with everything, there are winners and losers. So those who are living off interest or investment earnings with their home paid off are winners in an inflationary environment. They aren't, by the way, typically big spenders. On the other hand, those who are paying rent or have big mortgages, particularly with variable interest rates, will be playing catch up in an inflationary time. And so these typically bigger spenders will have less to spend, and when possible, they'll spend on assets or investments that they believe will grow with inflation, not discretionary spending.
Yeah, and that's exactly why inflation is threatening. I talk to colleagues and clients all the time, and a consistent theme is that it's harder for them to get products or even parts. And when they can get them, they cost so much more than they did just 12 months ago. One client actually told me that just the cost of a shipping container had jumped 500% in the past 12 months. It's incredible.
Who even thinks about that?
I know, and that's just the case. That's
Yeah,
just the thing
exactly.
that they put the goods in.
Yeah.
So what we can see on this graph is a dramatic lift in Australian June quarter inflation to 3.8%. That's almost as high as the US that we just saw. Yeah. That's the blue line you can see on this graphic. Interestingly, it dropped back to 3% in the September quarter. Now, according to the ABS, that was largely due to the unwinding of free childcare and a number of things. But what's significant here, Michele, is that the underlying measures of inflation, that's the black line you can see, and the red line are continuing upwards. Now, they exclude large one-off price impacts like free childcare. So they're much more accurate indicators of inflationary movement, and look at them, they're moving north consistently.
That's really interesting, Ross. So here at Roy Morgan, we continuously ask Australians where they think inflation is going over the next 2 years. And they're more aggressive than the economists. So it looks like we're in for inflation well ahead of the Reserve Bank's expectations. Maybe our respondents have heard the shipping container story. And while the RBA have not raised interest rates, they have scrapped the 2024 guidance, i.e. watch this space.
And if all this comes to bear, inflation could be a threat to retail forecasts that Roy Morgan is making in 2022 and beyond.
And an even bigger threat is a return to lockdowns. There is every possibility that a new COVID variant could emerge somewhere in the world, spread to Australia, and challenge our vaccination effectiveness. And according to our always-on predictive engine, if that did happen, the cost to the retail sector from a new round of lockdowns could top $4 billion a month. Over the worst of 2021, the New South Wales retail economy had a $40 million hit each and every day. And it was even worse in Victoria at $55 million every day of lockdown.
Yeah, and it has a wider impact as well, Michele. I calculate that in November 2020, more than 2,000 shops in Melbourne were either closed or empty. You just saw empty stores everywhere. And over recent years, more than 40 national and global retail brands have either shut down or left Australians, just left Australia, left Australian shores.
So COVID will remain a threat to retail spending in 2022. Now, changing gears, the good news for many of us is that the experience economy is back and stronger than ever.
Wasn't it you who announced?
We announced it.
You declared it was official that Australia had become an experience economy.
It was indeed Roy Morgan that announced that back in 2017, and now it's taking off again. But of course, that may not be entirely good news for retailers. The experience economy is where we pay for experiences, not things. And this graphic shows in the bottom left-hand corner that commodities are price-based and undifferentiated from competitors. Think wheat or iron ore.
The top right-hand corner, that shows that experiences deliver premium value, and they also differentiate a business from its competitors. Now, this might be a personalised tour to Paris with a small group to learn how to make the perfect cheese souffle, for example. Of course, not every experience is that exclusive, Michele, but I'm sure you get the point.
I get the point, Ross. We've been denied the opportunity to pay for experiences with closed borders and lockdowns. So instead, we've been buying things and doing it largely online. But that's changing, and already Australians are booking overseas trips and holidays in their own country. All that pent-up demand for experiences is channeling cash through travel agents, tourism operators and airlines. But what about retailers?
Yeah, this is the threat, isn't it? Spending really isn't endlessly elastic, even though people like me think it is. But if I spend $10,000 or $20,000 on a desperately needed holiday, Michele, that's $10,000 or $20,000 less I have to spend on shopping.
And if the acceleration of online shopping also slows down, the threat's amplified.
Now, Michele and I conducted a survey of Australian business leaders earlier in the year, and one of the key findings was that online sales had accelerated by up to 5 years.
Yes, I remember one CEO saying our total online sales were about 10% before COVID, so it was a very immature market. But he said we finished the year at 21%, so we've basically doubled in 12 months. But will that pace of growth continue?
Well, I don't know about you, Michele, but I'm really sick of my online purchases taking weeks, not days, to get to my front door. One of my orders simply never turned up.
This is a real threat to digital acceleration continuing at the same rate of growth through 2022. There's no doubt that online and omnichannel retailing in particular is here to stay. But if consumers are turning their mind to experiences and at the same time are frustrated by delays in deliveries, it's a stumbling block for retailers.
Yeah, I think we'll increasingly see smart retailers offering customers delivery options. You know, I'd happily pay a premium to have my purchase delivered in 2 hours. A second option would be to pay less and get it in the next day or so. And the final option would be to pay little or nothing and cross your fingers and hope for the best.
I knew you were going to have that little rant. But what is certain is if the whole delivery ecosystem is not sorted out soon, all the gains of digital acceleration will be lost. It is a real and present threat.
Oh, well, while I'm in ranting mode, the risk of commoditised retailing is another serious threat.
I think it's widely accepted that we're in a two-speed recovery with a commoditised slow lane and a premium fast lane.
And when it comes to growth, Michele, this graphic interestingly shows that over a 5-year period, the price-based slow lane grew by 37%. That's still pretty good. But look at the premium fast lane. It grew by 81%. That's more than twice the growth of price-based retailing. And importantly, if you look between them, there's very little growth in the middle.
That's right. And this is borne out by our own consumer data, which reveals a new economic order, or NEO, driving the fast lane of recovery, and 10 million traditional Australian consumers stuck in the slow lane. And these traditional consumers will be the ones most impacted by inflation and most likely to reduce their spending.
The real threat is that too many retailers think the 10 million price-based consumers, the traditionals you mentioned, are all there is. That's the entire economy. So they constantly drive prices down into the commodity space to attract these traditional consumers and ignore the huge upside that comes from premium consumers and the premiumisation strategy.
That's right. Ross, we could do this all day if we had time, but we're already over time, I'm afraid. So let's bring the session to a close. What we've seen today is very good news for retailers in Australia. If we can just manage the threats, the retail sector is set for a very strong recovery. Thank you, Ross, for a thoughtful discussion.
It's been great, thank you.
And finally, if anyone would like to ask a question or to get a copy of this presentation, simply email us at askroymorgan@roymorgan.com. So until next time, stay safe and go shopping.